Section 1 of The Story of the Trapper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ted Leinhart. The Story of the Trapper by Agnes Christina Laut. Part 1, Chapter 1. Gamesters of the Wilderness. Fearing nothing, stopping at nothing, knowing no law, ruling his stronghold of the wilds like a despot, checkmating rivals with a deviltry that beggars parallel, wassailing with a shamelessness that might have put Rome's worst deeds to the blush, fighting, always fighting with a courage that knew no truce but victory, the American trapper must ever stand as a type of the worst and the best in the militant heroes of mankind. Each with an army at his back, Wolfe and Napoleon won victories that upset the geography of Earth. The fur traders never at any time exceeded a few thousands in number, faced enemies unbacked by armies, and sallied out singly or in pairs, yet they won a continent that has bred a new race. Like John Coulter, whom Manuel Lisa met coming from the wilds 100 years ago, the trapper strapped a pack to his back, slung a rifle over his shoulder, and without any fanfare of trumpets, stepped into the pathless shade of the great forests. Or else, like Williams of the Arkansas, the trapper left the moorings of civilization in a canoe, hunted at night, hid himself by day, evaded hostile Indians by sliding downstream with muffled paddles, slept in mid-current, screened by the branches of driftwood, and if a sudden halloo of marauders came from the distance, cut the strap that held his craft to the shore and got away under cover of the floating tree. Hunters crossing the Cimarron Desert set out with pack horses and, like Captain Becknell's party, were often compelled to kill horses and dogs to keep from dying of thirst. Frequently their fate was that of Rocky Mountain Smith, killed by the Indians as he stooped to scoop out a drinking hole in the sand. Men who brought down their pelts to the mountain rendezvous of Pierre's Hole, or went over the divide like Fraser and Thompson of the Northwest Fur Company, had to abandon both horses and canoes, scaling canyon walls where the current was too turbulent for a canoe and the precipice too sheer for a horse, with the aid of their hunting knives stuck into the haft. Where the difficulties were too great for a few men, the fur traders clubbed together under a mastermind like John Jacob Astor of the Pacific Company or Sir Alexander Mackenzie of the Nor'westers. Banded together, they thought no more of coasting round the sheeted Antarctics or slipping down the ice-jammed current of the Mackenzie River under the midnight sun of the Arctic Circle than people today think of running from New York to Newport. When the conflict of 1812 cut off communication between western fur posts and New York by the overland route, Farnham, the Green Mountain boy, didn't think himself a hero at all for sailing to Kamchatka and crossing the whole width of Asia, Europe, and the Atlantic to reach Mr. Astor. The American fur trader knew only one rule of existence: to go ahead without any heroics, whether the going cost his own or some other man's life. That is the way the wilderness was won, and the winning is one of the most thrilling pages in history. About the middle of the 17th century, Pierre Radisson and Chouart Grossière, two French adventurers from Three Rivers, Quebec, followed the chain of waterways from the Ottawa and Lake Superior northwestward to the region of Hudson Bay. Returning with tales of fabulous wealth to be had in the fur trade of the North, they were taken in hand by members of the British Commission then in Boston, whose influence secured the Hudson's Bay Company charter in 1670. And that ancient and honorable body, as the company was called, reaped enormous profits from the bartering of pelts. But the bartering went on in a prosy, half-alive way, the traders sitting snugly in their forts on Rupert and Severn rivers, or at York Factory, Port Nelson, and Churchill, Prince of Wales, the French governor down in Quebec issued only a limited number of licenses for the fur trade in Canada, and the old English company had no fear of rivalry in the north. It never sought inland tribes, but waited with serene apathy for the Indians to come down to its fur posts on the bay. Young Le Moyne d'Iberville might march overland from Quebec to the bay, catch the English company nodding, scale the stockades, capture its forts, batter down a wall or two, and sail off like a pirate with shiploads of booty for Quebec. What did the ancient company care? European treaties restored its forts, and the honorable adventurers presented a bill of damages to their government for lost furs. But came a sudden change. Great movements westward began simultaneously in all parts of the East. This resulted from two events: England's victory over France at Quebec and the American colonies' declaration of independence. The downfall of French ascendancy in America meant an end to that license system which limited the fur trade to favorites of the governor. That threw an army of some 2,000 men, voyageurs, coureurs des bois, mangeurs de lard, famous hunters, traders, and trappers, on their own resources. The Macdonalds and Mackenzies and McGill of Rays and Frobishers and McTavishes, Scotch merchants of Quebec and Montreal, were quick to seize the opportunity. Uniting under the names of Northwest Fur Company and XY Fur Company, they re-engaged the entire retinue of cast-off Frenchmen, woodcraftsmen who knew every path and stream from Labrador to the Rocky Mountains. Giving higher pay and better fare than the old French traders, the Scotch merchants prepared to hold the field against all comers in the Canadas. And when the XY amalgamated with the larger company before the opening of the 19th century, the Nor'westers became as famous for their daring success as their unscrupulous ubiquity. But at that stage came the other factor, American independence. Locked in conflict with England, what deadlier blow to British power could France deal than to turn over Louisiana with its 1,000,000 square miles and 90,000 inhabitants to the American Republic? The Lewis and Clark exploration up the Missouri, over the mountains, and down the Columbia to the Pacific was a natural sequel to the Louisiana Purchase, and proved that the United States had gained a world of wealth for its $15 million. Before Lewis and Clark's feat, vague rumors had come to the New England colonies of the riches to be had in the West. The Russian government had organized a strong company to trade for furs with the natives of the Pacific coast. Captain Vancouver's report of the Northwest coast was corroborated by Captain Gray, who had stumbled into the mouth of the Columbia, and before 1800, nearly 30 Boston vessels yearly sailed to the northern Pacific for the fur trade. Eager to forestall the Hudson's Bay Company, now beginning to rub its eyes and send explorers westward to bring Indians down to the bay, Alexander Mackenzie of the Nor'westers pushed down the great river named after him and forced his way across the northern Rockies to the Pacific. Flotillas of Northwest canoes quickly followed Mackenzie's lead north to the Arctics, southwest down to Columbia. At Michilimackinac, one of the most lawless and roaring of the fur posts, was an association known as the Mackinac Company, made up of old French hunters under English management, trading westward from the lakes to the Mississippi. Hudson Bay, Nor'wester, and Mackinac were daily pressing closer and closer to that vast, unoccupied El Dorado, the fur country between the Missouri and the Saskatchewan, bounded eastward by the Mississippi, west by the Pacific. Possession is 9 points out of 10. The question was who would get possession first. Unfortunately, that question presented itself to 3 alert rivals at the same time and in the same light, and the war began. The Mackinac traders had all they could handle from the lakes to the Mississippi. Therefore, they did little but try to keep other traders out of the Western Preserve. The Hudson's Bay remained in its somnolent state till the very extremity of outrage brought such a mighty awakening that it put its rivals to an eternal sleep. But the Nor'westers were not asleep. and John Jacob Astor of New York, who had accumulated what was a gigantic fortune in those days as a purchaser of furs from America and a seller to Europe, was not asleep, and Manuel Lisa, a Spaniard of New Orleans, engaged at St. Louis in fur trade with the Osage tribes, was not asleep. End of section 1.